Good morning. Today we are working on the suspects. Lucy Harris had long been chief, if not the only identified suspect in the theft of the initial Book of Mormon manuscript. Her role in the theft, however, has been assumed more than argued and has been favored to the exclusion of other possibilities. While Lucy may or may not have been involved with the theft, she is just one of multiple potential suspects who also had access to Martin and motives to abscond with the manuscript. Lucy Harris. Oh, sorry, just a second. Before I start into Lucy Harris, let me just read this footnote real quick. There's a big footnote that was at the very end of last time, which is talking about the small plates being kind of a replacement for the new ones, and I can't remember if I read it. It's talking about, let me just read it again real quick, just in case. In addition to replacing the lost manuscript with another text, Joseph took another step that appears to have been aimed at foiling the conspirators described in Doctrine and Covenants 10. Early in June 1829, when Joseph finished translating Mormon's abridgment, he dispatched one of those assisting him to go to Utica to secure a copyright for the book. There are 4 oddities in how this was done. First, acquiring a copyright for a book was not usually considered necessary at the time and not usually done. Second, the book was not yet complete. Third, Joseph's assistant, presumably at his behest, insisted that not just the book's title, as required by law, but its entire title page be transcribed into the copyright application. Fourth, the copyright thus acquired technically did not cover Nephi's small plates. The title page transcribed into the copyright record explicitly identified Mormon's record as the work to be copyrighted, making no mention of Nephi's text, and the small plates text mostly had not been translated. What the copyright specifically protected was the translation of Mormon's abridgment. Since the lost manuscript was, Joseph tells us, part of Mormon's abridgment, the lost manuscript would have been protected by copyright Joseph obtained. It thus appears that Joseph's decision to pursue a copyright for the Book of Mormon text was aimed at stopping the conspirators from publishing the stolen manuscript. For copyright law at the time, see Nathaniel Hinckley Wadsworth, Copyright Laws in the 1830 Book of Mormon. I don't think I read that last time, but that is fascinating. So that's interesting. That is interesting, because that means that he was doing everything he could to make sure that it couldn't come back and try and destroy the work of the Lord. Okay, so we're going back to the suspects. Seriously now. Okay, Lucy Harris. Lucy Harris was a strong-willed woman that Lucy Mack Smith described as having an irascible temper. You can see that from Lucy's book. Lorenzo Saunders, who claimed to know Lucy Harris but did not seem to share Lucy Smith's dislike of her, similarly described her as pretty high on combativeness. And you can see Lorenzo Saunders interviewed by E.L. Kelly. This temper and combativeness of Lucy Harris is known to have taken other dramatic measures to separate her husband from the Book of Mormon project. About 3 months before June 1828 manuscript theft, she reportedly colluded with an accomplice to discredit the Book of Mormon by stealing Anton's transcript, with the manuscript thief or thieves probably stole again. You can see that from Lucy's book. And several months after the manuscript theft, around early spring 1829, she attempted to stop Joseph Smith from resuming the translation by suing him for defrauding Martin of his money with spurious claims to possess and translate ancient gold plates. You can see again Anderson's book. Given these actions, It is reasonable to think she may have taken similarly dramatic action to stop the book's translation while the manuscript was stored in her home, and plausibly within her reach. Footnote 30. Lucy Harris's early distaste for the book that absorbed her husband's time and resources only grew with time. 5 years later, after she and Martin had separated and had gone on a mission, she and Martin had separated, and he had gone on a mission to proselytize people to the Book of Mormon. She wrote, "The man has now become rather an object of pity. He has spent most of his property and lost the confidence of his former friends. If he had labored as hard on his farm as he has to make the Mormons, he might now be one of the wealthiest farmers in the country. He now spends his time in traveling through the country, spreading the delusion of Mormonism, and has no regard whatever for his family." Lucy Harris's statement. Wow. Wow. All right. This is common with what happens in separation and divorce cases. The bitterness from her. God. It's understandable. It's understandable. I can cognitively understand it. I will emotionally and viscerally absolutely just shake my head. The claim that Lucy had stolen the manuscript appeared in print within 3 years of the theft. You can see Progress of Mormonism. Of 44 known 19th century sources regarding the stolen manuscript, over 1/3, 15 of them, identified Lucy Harris as the thief. Early Palmyra rumor said Martin had interrogated his wife about the manuscript and vented his anger at her over its disappearance, resulting in the couple's separation and enduring bitterness towards one another. John A. Clark to Dear Brethren, August 31st, 1840. You can see this also in Jesse Townsend and Phineas Styles, December 24th, 1833, and in Pomeroy Tucker's Origin, Rise, and Progress of Mormonism. And also Old Newspapers, volume number 24 and volume number 25. Martin reportedly shared his early belief that his wife had taken the manuscript and given it to others with Palmyra Episcopal minister John A. Clark. See John A. Clark to Dear Brethren, August 31st, 1840. And according to one statement, Martin came to believe late in life that Lucy had taken the manuscript and burned it. The source for that is William Pilkington, A Dying Testimony Given by Martin Harris. This is backed up by Lorenzo Saunders, who claimed to have heard her actually confess to doing so. Lorenzo Saunders interviewed E. L. Kelly, November 12, 1884. Harris family tradition similarly describes her taking the manuscript and burning it. Francis McGee, Oral History, interviewed by Mike George in Linda Stiletto and Alan D. Roberts' book, Salamander, The Story of the Mormon Forgery and Murders. Lucy's access to the manuscript, motivation, alienation from Martin, early suspicion, reported confession, and family tradition make a strong case of her being the manuscript thief. However, there are reasons to be suspicious of the allegations. First, her motive to steal the manuscript, and particularly to steal and then destroy it, is not unequivocal. Before the manuscript disappeared, Lucy's opposition to the Book of Mormon was inconsistent, becoming permanently entrenched only after Martin blamed its disappearance on her. When Joseph first recovered the plates, Lucy Harris reportedly volunteered money to the Smiths to help with the book. See Anderson's Lucy's book. She was also apparently pleased with its contents when she was finally able to view the manuscript, and this report is consistent with the circumstances. Again, Anderson's book. Martin Harris evidently perceived such positive shift in his wife's attitude when he entrusted the manuscript to her care, even to the point of allowing her exclusive control over its access, since she, not he, initially held the key. And notably, the manuscript did not disappear while in Lucy Harris's care. It was not until after Martin took the manuscript back into his own care, securing it in his own bureau, that it disappeared. And even when Martin blamed her for the manuscript's later disappearance, he did not believe his wife's attitude toward it to be such that she would destroy it. He instead believed she had given it to others. Clark's letter to Dear Brethren, August 31st, 1840, in Vogel. It may be posited that Martin's view that the stolen manuscript was not destroyed, but given to others, grows out of Joseph Smith's May 1829 revelation indicating that manuscript was still in existence, which is Doctrine and Covenants 10. But John A. Clark is reporting on a conversation he had with Martin in 1828, and thus prior to this revelation, and as shown later in the chapter, Martin Harris actually rejected Doctrine and Covenants 10, apparently because it called him a wicked man. It would thus not have been the source of Martin's interpretation of the manuscript loss. So that means that before Doctrine and Covenants 10 came out, that Martin Harris already had the idea that it was probably given to other people, before he later believed that it may have been burned. And so, wow, for him it would have been just a terrible blow and a huge mystery. And, oof, that's rough. And the points that he's bringing up about Lucy Harris it didn't disappear under her watch while it was in her care. Her attitude towards the Book of Mormon was inconsistent until later she was blamed. It's, wow. Good points, good points. Anyway. Later in life, according to one source, Martin did come to believe his wife had both taken the manuscript and burned it. That's Pilkington's dying testimony of Martin Harris. So that's where he ended up being. However, there are reasons to be skeptical of this 1934 affidavit by William Pilkington reporting on an 1874 or 1875 interview with Harris, written over a century after the original events and even some 6 decades after the conversation it reports. Pilkington's recollection seems to rely heavily on Joseph Smith's published history of the manuscript loss rather than Martin, pointing to the likelihood that it was also influenced by a common rumor of Lucy Harris's burning the manuscript, a rumor that had become only more prevalent during the 20th century, complicating the affidavit even further. Just 4 years later, Pilkington recounted in his 1938 autobiography that Martin thought the manuscripts to have been stolen from his wife and taken into unknown hands. It's unclear whether Martin told either story. So the footnotes for that section. Pilkington almost certainly would not have recalled precisely the names of those to whom Martin was to show the manuscript without consulting Joseph Smith's published history, and the range of translation dates he attributed to Martin's narrative reflect the approximate dates estimated by Joseph in his history. Pilkington also follows closely Joseph Smith's version of the Anton incident from his 1839 history, which, as shown above in Chapter 2, varies from Martin's known recitations of the events. See Joseph Smith, History of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Other sources came from William Pilkington's autobiography of 1934 to 1939, and the very last one about whether Martin told either story. It is similarly difficult to establish the reliability of the supposed Harris family tradition of Lucy stealing and burning the manuscript. This tradition was reported in the 1987 book Salamander, previously cited, in a semi-novelized account of the Mark Hoffman forgery investigation. The authors of Salamander cite Frances McGee, a widow of Martin and Lucy Harris's, a widow of a Martin and Lucy Harris descendant, telling an investigator in the mid-1980s that Lucy had stolen and burned the Book of Mormon's lost pages, with nearly a century and a half separating the manuscript theft and McGee relating her understanding of the Harris family tradition. The lack of additional evidence corroborating the tradition's provenance and the possibility of it being influenced by outside sources makes McGee account too unreliable. Francis McGee, Oral History. So don't you see how he's just, even though this has been like the tradition and the common knowledge, he reconstructs the timeline and the sources. This is why I just love Don Bradley and his work. All right, back to the text. Moreover, only one of the available sources claims an admission from Lucy herself. In this 1884 account, Palmyra resident Lorenzo Saunders was quite emphatic about hearing Lucy confess to stealing and burning the manuscript. Quote, I was well acquainted with Martin Harris's wife, as well as I was with my own wife, and know what course she took and when she burned up those papers. I heard her say she burned the papers. She was pretty high on combativeness. She says she burned them up, and there was no mistake, but she did. They never was found, never came to light. I lived till I was 43 years old, right there, and she never denied of burning the papers. He brought them home to proselytize her, and she burned them. Unquote. And that's from Saunders' interview by Kelly, November 12, 1884. Unfortunately, Saunders' report of having acquired this information directly from Lucy is also problematic. Despite Saunders' claim to closeness to Lucy, the life circumstances of Saunders and Lucy do not make it obvious that they should have known one another. Lucy lived on the opposite side of Palmyra from Saunders and was 15 years his senior, the two being at the time of the theft respectively 32 and 17. In addition, Saunders' claim that Lucy never denied burning the papers the entire time he lived in Palmyra until he was 43, i.e. 1854, loses steam against the facts of Lucy's having denied and of her death nearly 2 decades earlier in 1836. So he'll probably bring up here in a second that she denied having burned them, and she denied it on her deathbed, which is going to be important. And so him saying that, oh, she never denied it is wrong, period. Further, contrary to Saunders' assertion that Lucy denied taking the manuscript, that Lucy never denied taking the manuscript, she reportedly denied any complicity in the theft on multiple occasions around the time of its occurrence, was still denying it several years later, within a few years of her death, and even denied it to fellow opponents of the Book of Mormon. Lucy Mack Smith, undoubtedly basing her account on Martin's July 1828 confession to the saints about losing the manuscript, said that even under Martin's stringent questioning about the theft, his wife said solemnly averred that she did not know anything about it whatever. Lucy Smith's preliminary manuscript in Anderson's Lucy's Book. In 1833, Lucy Harris was approached by D.P. Hurlbut, that's a great name, D.P. Hurlbut for information that would undermine the faith Martin now advocated. Given the widespread rumors that she had taken it, it seems implausible that Hurlbut failed to ask about it. The only indication of what she told him on the question appears in the book begun by Hurlbut and completed in 1834 by E.D. Howe, Mormonism Unveiled. The fact respecting the lost manuscript we have not been able to ascertain. They sometimes charge the wife of Harris with having burnt it, but this is denied by her. That comes from Ebert E. Howe, Mormonism Unveiled, page 22. Although Howe does not directly address the claim that Lucy burned the manuscript, his admission that the manuscript's fate was yet unknown to him indicates that Lucy had denied to Hurlbut either seeing or destroying it. She denied either stealing or destroying it. If not from Lucy Harris, where did the rumor that she had stolen and burned the manuscript originate? The first known source attributing the manuscript theft to Lucy Harris is a May 1831 article in Georgia Gazette? Geauga. To me, I would say Geauga Gazette, but Georgia. Maybe it's meant to be Georgia Gazette. I have no idea. A newspaper printed in the early Mormon gathering place of Kirtland, Ohio, the Gazette article, as reprinted in the Philadelphia Album, reported, quote, "We are told that the wife of the prophet Harris refused to be a Mormonite, and he has left her among the Gentiles. She is who was purloined several pages. She it was who purloined several pages of the first revelation, and which, by the direction of the angel, have never been supplied." That is Progressive Mormonism for that account. And this account states that it was a reprint of an article in the Tuesday issue of the Painesville Gazette, i.e. the Geauga Gazette. The original article likely appeared in Tuesday, May 24th, 1831 issue of Geauga Gazette. No extant copy of this issue of the Gazette is known to the author. The fact that this report was published near Kirtland rather than in New York points to the Gathering Saints, not the Palmyra rumor mill, as its source. There, the Saints had a ready source of information and opinion on the subject, Martin Harris. The Gazette article, in which Martin and Lucy Harris were mentioned, was about the incoming Mormons, many of whom would have had access to Martin's views on the disappearance of the manuscript. But the Gazette's likeliest source was Martin himself, who had come to Kirtland from Palmyra in March 1831, briefly traveled back to Palmyra, and then returned to Kirtland around the time of the Gazette article. If Martin had spoken to the Gazette, it would not have been the only newspaper he had spoken to, as other sources show Martin to have had dealings with the area's newspapermen during his early days in Kirtland. During a visit to Kirtland earlier in 1831, Martin Harris presented to Eberhau's Painesville Telegraph office a copy of the Articles and Covenants of the Church for publication. Howe complied with Martin's request, publishing the Articles and Covenants in April 19, 1831 issue of the Painesville Telegraph, but added a critical introduction, The Mormon Creed, in Larry E. Morris's documentary History of the Book of Mormon. You can see that as a source. While Martin had begun blaming his wife shortly after the manuscripts disappeared in 1828, this belief appears to have been more of a suspicion on his part that something he could warrant from direct evidence. If Martin had good evidence pinning the deed on his wife, he presumably would not have blamed the less likely suspect that he focused his suspicions on during his later years, an angel. You can see the discussion of Martin Harris Jr. account below. Given the tense marital circumstances that led to Martin bringing the manuscript home, it is understandable that he would have had suspected his wife of the theft. Adding to this, Martin would have been motivated to believe she was the thief in order to deflect blame from himself. Joseph Smith believed that the theft was a direct result of Martin breaking his covenant with God by showing the manuscript to persons other than those he was permitted to. That is a good point. See the history of the church. In addition to the revelation that blamed the manuscript's disappearance on wicked men, had also called Martin himself a wicked man, making him loath to accept the revelation and shoulder some degree of responsibility for the loss of the book of Scripture. If Martin could pass the blame to someone who he had been authorized to show the manuscript, then he could possibly claim that he was not to blame. Given Lucy's easy access to the manuscript, she was not just a plausible suspect, but a perfect scapegoat for Martin to absolve himself with. While Martin was undoubtedly giving his real opinion in suspecting his wife of the theft, his interpretation of the events was most certainly influenced by both their marital problems and the very human tendency to deflect blame. Although those writing about the manuscript theft have largely followed Martin Harris's initial identification of Lucy Harris as the thief, it appears that Martin himself may have abandoned this theory quite early. While Martin was making this accusation as early as 1828 and up until 1831, after that time no report exists of Martin making this claim outside William Pilkington's contradictory second-hand accounts a century later. Martin did speak of a theft in various later interviews, but in those he offered no opinion on the identity of the thief. In the end, what most persuaded Martin of Lucy's innocence was her continued denial until the moment of her death. Speaking to a congregation in Rexburg, Idaho, 29 years after his father's death, Martin Harris Jr., the elder Martins from a later marriage, said of his parents and the lost manuscript, quote, "After he had read it, the manuscript, to his wife, he locked it up in a drawer and put the key on a chain which he carried around his neck. He then had an occasion to go away on business for a few days, and when he came back and went to get it, and it was gone, he at once accused his wife of having taken it, but she declared positively that she had not touched it, and knew nothing about it. And on her deathbed, she still declared that she had never seen them and knew nothing about them. And she called God to witness the truth of her statement. He said, as far as he could see, the lock had not been tampered with." That comes from William Wallace White, Journal, May 15th, 1904. While it might be argued that Martin Harris told this story to his children to avoid implicating their mother in the theft, it should be noted that Lucy Harris was not the mother of the informant here. Martin Harris Jr. was the son of Martin Harris and Collie Young Harris, sister of Brigham Young. Interesting. And, yeah, real interesting. As a devout Quaker whose every word was supposed to be spoken of as if under oath, Lucy Harris seems unlikely to have gone to her grave repeating lies. Or, at any rate, Martin Harris, despite knowing well the difficult aspects of his estranged wife's temperament, was unable to believe she would blatantly lie on her deathbed. As a result, Martin, the first person to postulate that Lucy had taken the manuscript, came to reject this explanation. Unable to believe either that Lucy had lied about the theft or that his own breaking of his covenant had jeopardized the manuscript's safety, Martin developed a highly idiosyncratic theory of the manuscript's fate. He came to hold that the initial contents of the Book of Mormon disappeared the same way they had originally appeared, as reported by Martin Jr. It was always a mystery to him what became of them, but his theory that an angel came and took them. But his theory was that an angel came and took them. That's William Wallace White, Journal, May 15th, 1904. Clarifying this unusual understanding and demonstrating Francis Gladden Bishop's tendency to echo back to Martin the very things Martin had told Bishop, the later claimed in 1851 to know by revelation who had taken the manuscript from Martin Harris, an angel whose name was Nephi, who was the same holy angel who first appeared to Joseph, had taken the manuscript of the 116 pages which was translated by Joseph. Bishop thus confirmed to Martin what Martin already believed. Francis Gladden Bishop, an address to the sons and daughters of God scattered abroad through all the earth, is the source of that. Clarifying this unusual understanding and demonstrating Francis Gladden Bishop's tendency to echo back to Martin the very things Martin had told Bishop, the latter claimed in 1851 to know by revelation who had taken the manuscript from Martin Harris, an angel whose name was Nephi, was already believed. So, sorry for rereading that little section, because I was just sitting here trying to think about how that can happen. This is why journals and writing things down is so important. Because I did this with my friends when I was a kid. My friends would tell me a story. I would remember the story, but I wouldn't remember that they had told it to me. And it was hilarious when I told them back the story that they told me. It was, God, I can relate to that, and that's funny. And so often we repeat our stories to the people we already know and love because we can't remember if we told them or not the story. But it fits what we're talking about, so we need to say it again. And so someone may get a story we've shared it for a second or a third time, whereas others just may never hear it because we think we've told them and we haven't. Oh, God, history is messy. Don Bradley is doing a very good job of parsing out how things go. Although Martin abandoned his earlier belief that Lucy had stolen the manuscript, the seeds of her suspicion that he sowed began to take root. In 1851, the same year Bishop mirrored Martin's claim about an angel taking the manuscript, Erasmus Turner built on Martin's earlier explanation of who took it and added further speculations. With sacrilegious hands, she, Lucy Harris, seized over 100 of the manuscript pages of the New Revelation and burned or secreted them. That's from Erasmus Turner, History of the Pioneer Settlement of Phelps and Gorham's Purchase, and also Early Mormon Documents. Turner's tentative qualified conjecture nearly a quarter of a century after the manuscript theft is the first time anyone had suggested in print that the manuscript may have been destroyed. 5 years later, a Manchester local who had read Turner echoed his words, but added a preference for one of Turner's two speculations on the manuscript's fate. His wife, who was an unbeliever, seized them and either burned or secreted them. It was supposed the former. That comes from Mormonism in its infancy, around August 1856. 11 years later, Pomeroy Tucker improved still further on the certainty of Turner's burning speculation by eliminating the other possibility. Thus exercised, she contrived in her husband's sleep to steal from him the particular source of her disturbance and burn the manuscript to ashes. That is Tucker's Origin, Rise, and Progress of Mormonism. This would be repeated until there was no question in anyone's mind. Lining up the sources chronologically, we observe a trend. The further we get from the actual theft, the more certain the rumors become of Lucy Harris taking the manuscript and burning it. Since Lucy Harris's possible role in the theft is unclear, the long tradition of her certain guilt is unwarranted. None of the accounts of her having stolen it can be reliably traced to a confession from her. To the contrary, given her antagonism towards Joseph Smith and the Restoration, Lucy had motive to claim credit for the manuscript theft, even if she did not do it. A confession from Lucy having stolen and destroyed the manuscript would have dealt a serious blow to the credibility of Joseph Smith's revelations, which pinned the deed on wicked men who had not destroyed the revelation but altered it. Such a confession would have also vindicated Mrs. Harris by demonstrating that the religion her estranged husband had used to their family, it would have vindicated Mrs. Harris by demonstrating that the religion her estranged husband had used their family fortunes to build up was based on delusion. In place of such confession, Lucy Harris's continued denial of having committed the theft ultimately convinced the one person who had the greatest reason to blame her for the crime, and who had started the rumors of her guilt in the first place, her estranged husband, Martin. Pomeroy Tucker acknowledged that Lucy Harris refused to acknowledge the theft at first. Writing years later in 1867, for years she kept this incendiarism a profound secret to herself, even until after the book was published. But Tucker never discloses to whom and when, if ever, Lucy Harris ultimately confessed her reputed role in the theft. See Tucker, Origin, Rise, and Progress of Mormonism. So Martin, at least, was convinced of her innocence because of her speaking about how she denied it, even until her death. While her continued denial and lack of corroborating evidence is not proof of her innocence, those should give us reason to be open to other suspects. Another potential suspect of the manuscript theft is Lucy and Martin Harris's son-in-law, Flanders Dyke, whose missed wedding to Martin's daughter was a factor in Martin wanting so desperately to take the translation manuscript home. The romance of Flanders Dyke and Lucy Harris Jr., however, had another close connection to the manuscript loss that has not yet been discussed. It prompted the theft of one of the documents involved in the translation of the Book of Mormon. Lucy Mack Smith recounts, quote, "A young man by the name of Dykes had been paying some attention to Miss Lucy, Martin Harris's oldest daughter. To this young man, Mr. Harris was quite attached, and his daughter Lucy was by no means opposed to him, but Mrs. Harris, of course, was decidedly upon the negative. However, just at this crisis, a scheme entered her brain, which materially changed her deportment to Mr. Dykes. She told him if he could manage to get the Egyptian characters, the characters taken to Charles Anton, from Mr. Harris's possession, and procure a room in Palmyra for the purpose of transcribing them, and then bring her the transcript, that she would consent to his marriage with her daughter Lucy. To this Mr. Dykes cheerfully consented, and, suffice it to say, he succeeded to her satisfaction, and thus received the promised reward. When Mr. Harris began to make preparations to start for Pennsylvania the second time, with the view of writing for Joseph, his wife told him that she had fully decreed in her heart to accompany him. Mr. Harris, having no particular objections, informed her that she might do so, and she might go and stay 1 or 2 weeks, and then he would bring her home again, after which he would return and resume his writing for Joseph. To this she cheerfully agreed, but Mr. Harris's little suspected what he had to encounter by this move. The first time he exhibited the characters before named, she took out of her pocket an exact copy of the same and told those present that Joe Smith was not only one who was in possession of this great curiosity, that she had the same characters, and they were quite as genuine as those shown by Mr. Harris. This course she continued to pursue until they arrived at Joseph's. See Anderson's Lucy's book. That was the end of the quote. Lucy Mack Smith likely heard of these events from both her son Joseph and Martin, but the narration she gives also bears her stamp. Fiercely loyal to her prophet's son, Lucy Smith painted those who opposed him in the darkest of colors. Nowhere is this truer than her descriptions of Martin's wife. Lucy Smith's telling of the events makes Lucy Harris the epicenter of the resistance Joseph experienced while attempting to bring forth the Book of Mormon, including in 1829 Palmyra effort to discredit his claim to have the plates. Describing the origin of this opposition, Lucy Smith writes of Lucy Harris, quote, "She mounted her horse, flew from house to house, through the neighborhood, like a dark spirit, making diligent inquiry wherever she had the least hopes of gleaning anything, and stirring up every malicious feeling which would tend to subserve her wicked purpose. Having ascertained a number and strength of her adherents, she entered a complaint against Joseph before a certain magistrate of Lyons." That is from Smith's Biographical Sketches. Yet while Lucy Smith confidently identified Lucy Harris as the source of this organized opposition, Martin characterized it more generally. Quote, "In March 1929, the people rose up and united against the work, gathering testimony against the plates, and said they had testimony enough, and if I did not put Joseph in jail and his father for deception, they would me." A testimony of Martin Harris in 1870 for that quote. Martin did not identify a single instigator for this opposition, but attributed it to a broad group. Given Lucy Mack Smith's tendency to turn the merely paranoid Lucy Harris almost into someone truly malicious, like a dark spirit, her jarring report that Mrs. Harris swapped a copy of Anton's transcript for her daughter's hand in marriage should be viewed with suspicion. Yet the narratives in Lucy Mack Smith's history are not manufactured out of whole cloth. They represent actual, if occasionally distorted, events. Stripping Lucy Smith's narrative of her rather extreme view of Lucy Harris, we find the probable core event. In early spring 1828, Flanders Dyke, whether on his own initiative or Lucy Harris's, curried favor with his potential mother-in-law by purloining and duplicating the character transcript for her. See Anderson's Lucy book. Lucy Smith's account, while somewhat fuzzy on what Lucy Harris hoped to accomplish with the duplicate character transcript, implies that the latter claimed to have gotten the characters from a modern source, probably hoping to convince others that Joseph also obtained the characters from such a source, rather than from ancient gold plates. See Smith's Biographical Sketches for sources on that. Within 4 months after Flanders Dykes reportedly stole and copied the character's transcript in order to discredit Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon, an unidentified person is said to have done the same thing with the translation manuscript for the same purpose. The thief or thieves who took the translation manuscript probably also stole the same document Dyke had, taking the transcript along with the translation, since, as noted earlier, the transcript appears to have not been seen by anyone after 1828. While the identity of this thief is unknown, such theft, copying, and attempted discrediting of the Book of Mormon documents, including the character transcript, would not have been a new misdeed for Flanders Dyke, who not only had a personal history of such behavior, but also opportunity, motive, and a later pattern of property theft. Martin, who reportedly showed the manuscript to any friend who asked, is almost sure to have shown the translation manuscript to his new son-in-law, who was living in a house on Martin's property at the time. For more about Flanders and Lucy Dyke's house on Martin Harris's property, see the discussion below of the June 30th, 1828 deed to Flanders Dyke. Although Martin reportedly felt quite attached to Flanders, the latter had cause to feel slighted by his father-in-law on behalf of himself and his new bride, and likely Lucy Sr. had a rationale for feeling threatened by Martin's involvement with the Book of Mormon. Flanders, whose earlier cooperation with his mother-in-law points to him to sharing her skepticism about the book, would have also been concerned with the Harris family's financial fortunes, now positioned to inherit from Martin's estate through Lucy Jr. He had particular reason to guard that estate against large investments from which he was not confident of a return. Beyond the ability and motivation to steal the manuscript, Flanders also soon earned a reputation for theft. In August 1830, 7 months after E.B. Grandin printed the Book of Mormon, the same press printed an article for Wayne Sentinel warning readers to look out for a swindler. Quote, Flanders Dyke absconded from Palmyra, Wayne County, New York, on Saturday night, the 7th, after inst. I don't know what that would be in newspaper speak, INST. I don't know if it means instant or that is an instance or what, but that's what it says. Is Saturday night, the 7th, inst. After having virtually swindled persons to the amount of about $1,000, Dyke had resided in this town for about 5 or 6 years and had managed to marry the daughter of a wealthy and respectable farmer. He soon afterwards obtained a lease of his father-in-law's farm for a term of years not yet expired, on very favorable terms, and appeared to be in the full tide of prosperity. By the aid of credit with which these circumstances acquired for him, he bought such property of his neighbors and goods from the stores as he could get trusted for, promising generally the avails of a crop of wheat which he had on the ground. He harvested his wheat, carried a quantity to market, for which he received cash, obtained advances in money and goods on account of the remainder, and on the night above stated having accumulated in cash and property about $1,000, started in company with a young man of the name of Asa Hill for Michigan. They were pursued the next day, and on Monday morning following, most of the property in the charge of Hill was overtaken and secured a few miles west of Batavia. Dyke, anticipating the pursuit, had a few hours previously taken another route, and thereby escaped with most of the money. This is the 5th similar trick that had been played off upon people in this vicinity within a few years by persons belonging to the same family. Their names should be recorded for the benefit and security of the public. Samuel Dyke, Sr., once a saddler and trunk maker by trade, now a man of no steady employment. Samuel Dyke, Jr., saddler, stage driver, etc., last heard from in Canada. James Dyke, a rat saddler, runner for canal boats, etc. John Biggs, son-in-law to Samuel Dyke, Sr., Baker and went to Buffalo, known in Canandaigua. And what is Canandaigua? Probably a different province of Canada as known at the time. And last, though not least, in knavery, Flanders Dyke, the chief subject of this notice. Palmyra, New York, August 16th, 1830. Printers throughout the United States and Michigan and Canada through Michigan and Canada are requested to insert or notice the above. Look out for a swindler. Wow, geez, that's the... Whew. Okay. Dyke later went back to Palmyra, perhaps returning more of the unjustly taken money and goods, but his return and any restitution he had made did not end his days of scheming after property. A decade after this incident, Dyke again appeared in the newspaper, this time with a reward offered for his capture after his escape from Palmyra jail, where he had been held for obtaining property on false pretenses. It was a $25 reward. A possible indication that Martin had his own suspicion of Dyke's role in the manuscript theft appears in the historical record, near and likely immediately after the theft. On June 30th, 1828, perhaps 2 weeks after Martin's return home with the manuscript in hand, Martin and Lucy Harris executed a deed to Dyke for the house and the land on which he was living. The timing of this conveyance suggests a settling up of accounts during a parting of the ways. Lucy had secured her own separate maintenance from Martin in May, recording his earlier deed to her. When their alienation was completed with the manuscript's loss, and Martin's suspicions focused on her, no further steps were necessary for Lucy to live separately from Martin. But if Dyke had also fallen under Martin's suspicions in the wake of a manuscript's disappearance, a settlement between the two men would have been needed. The house and land on which Dyke and Lucy Harris Jr. lived belonged to Martin, and up to this point, Dyke had apparently lived on this property by Martin's good graces. But good graces, it appears, were no longer sufficient, and now would require $200. See the indenture, Martin Harris and Lucy Harris to Flanders Dyke, Wayne County, New York, June 30th, 1828. I'm grateful to the intrepid Marie Thatcher for finding this source for me. Thus, a few lines of evidence suggest that Dyke took part in the manuscript theft. Dyke apparently fell under Martin's own suspicions, had unusually close access to the stolen documents, multiple motives for stealing them, a personal resume that included stealing and copying one of these documents in order to discredit it, and a subsequent record of entrepreneurial activities that placed his hands on other people's pockets. A very peculiar friend. Another person whose possible role in the theft should be considered is Martin Harris's very particular friend, mentioned but not named by Lucy Mack Smith. In her account, this friend displayed an especially keen interest in the book, calling on Martin shortly after he got there, with the manuscript much excited and earnestly desiring to see it. Martin, for his part, was recklessly eager to share the manuscript with this friend, and at the friend's urging, compromised the manuscript's safety by damaging its secure compartment and established a precedent for sharing the manuscript with persons outside the family. That comes from Lucy's book. Joseph Smith, sharing either knowledge or surmise later attributed to theft to persons to whom Martin had shown the manuscript pages beyond the permitted 5, he did shew them to others, and by stratagem they got them away from him. See Smith et al., History of the Church. Joseph's ascription of the theft to stratagem is telling and hints at what he understood to have occurred. Stratagem, as defined by Webster's Dictionary of the time, referred to an artifice, a plan or scheme for deceiving an enemy, or a trick by which some advantage is intended to be obtained. That's Webster's edition of American Dictionary of the English Language. Simple theft, someone sneaking in and taking the manuscript while Martin was away, would not seem to qualify. What stratagem, then, did Joseph Smith think had been used to part Martin from the manuscript? Joseph, in company with his mother, had heard Martin's July 1828 confession of mishandling the manuscript, and therefore knew that at the urging of a very particular friend had led him to compromise the manuscript's security. It is likely in this incident that Joseph detected a trick. Although Lucy does not provide the identity of Martin's mischief-making friend, there is at least one likely candidate among Martin's known associates, someone from the very group of money diggers who had previously attempted to steal the golden plates. The next section is the money diggers. And that one's much longer too. Oh, but that's near the end of the chapter. But this is pretty good reading for the day. You know, yes, I absolutely detest the idea that Lucy Harris made an exit plan because of what her husband was doing. Is it understandable? Yes, it's very understandable because from her point of view, her husband was acting extremely recklessly, and her being very disagreeable and combative would mean that her personality would be to, well, fine, screw him. I'm going to set things up and be ready to go. But yet, we can see, at least with how Don Bradley puts things, that she was probably like, you know, off and on okay with it and not okay with it, depending on the circumstance. And of course, after she gets blamed for the theft, I can see why she was just like, I don't want to have anything to do with this anymore, and separated from him. Oh God, that's just so troubling. But, you know, I get it. And then the vitriol and bitterness afterwards, I get that too. I mean, it's the way Don Bradley presents things helps you see the emotion that was injected by other people, but it also helps you sit there and remove it as well, going like, you know, Lucy Smith, Joseph's mother, going after Lucy Harris for, oh, her da-da-da-da-da. You know, I can see that I could conceive of Lucy Harris going from door to door, not as an evil spirit, dark spirit, but as someone who would, I don't know, there are times where people have gone door to door to solicit to solicit getting bad reports from neighbors. I've seen that apparently in my own life. So, is it conceivable that Lucy Harris did that? Yeah. Could she have done it literally knocking door to door? Yes. Could she have just done it passively, like when she would go and talk with the neighbors, just try and drop it in conversation and then accumulate that up and stir the pot, and because of her combative nature kind of, have you ever gone in conversations with somebody and they are focused on what their problem is and turning you into a supporter of their point of view? It's a common thing. For people who are combative and focused, that tends to be like their life, to stir things up till they get their way. Not just, like, some people bring up their problems and want you on their side of view for, you know, emotional support, a pat on the back, we're here for you, we're looking for support, or they just want to vent and be done with it, or looking for resolution. Other people who are combative want to gather an army and get things done. So, you know, it depends on the situation. So I could see Lucy Harris doing something like that, whether it's passive or literally knocking door to door. If she had a combative personality, then it could be either. I mean, it's very humanizing for Lucy Harris. At the same time, it's just like, I still shake my head with how crappy that attitude is. At what point can we blame our defaults in our personalities for the actions that we take in our life? Because, I mean, if you think about it, if you grow up with a combative nature, whether that was gained because you had to fight your way through your siblings to get what you want, or the way to do things, that you had to, you developed a tool necessary to approach life by being combative, because it got you your way. And because of that, that tool got strengthened, and then it became part of your default personality. At what point can we blame our shortfallings as human beings of being charitable and keeping to our vows and keeping our covenants. How much can we blame, oh, well, I just grew up with it? You know, it's just like, how much is that? Because I know Lucy Harris wasn't ever part of the Church of Jesus Christ. And for that, I don't think she's going to be judged harshly. I mean, she's already being judged harshly by history. As we can see, it just, oh, she took it and she burned it. And that's the conclusion for most people. But when you get to the sources, when you do the work like Don Bradley, you see, no, it's not that clear. It's really not that clear. And as he points out, if her religious background as a Quaker was that everything she says should be a testimony of truth, and especially on her deathbed, where they would view that going to meet their maker in just a few days or a few hours, that the last thing you want coming out of your mouth is a lie, that's really a strong indication that, no, they really didn't do it, especially if that's a very strong belief in that community at the time. So he makes a really good case for saying it really could possibly be that it wasn't Lucy Harris. And that makes a lot of sense, funny enough. But it does leave us going, well, who could it be? And it is interesting that he brings up the people that I was wondering about, like his Martin Harris's son-in-law. Wow, that's, prior and post-performance does not indicate that he was the one actually to do it, but that does increase statistically the chances that it was the son-in-law that did it, because there may be no evidence for it, but at the same time, how often is it that you have someone who's like has all these things going wrong before and after that isn't involved in some way? Could be. And like you said, he's about to bring up the money digging friends, which is another good point about that. So it really is going to continue to be a mystery until we get the rewind in the afterlife. But I just the scholarly work that Don Bradley does really makes it much more understandable with everything. I think it's interesting that Martin Harris, like, he has done so much for the church, and yet he's mostly remembered for losing the last 116 pages, which is a tragedy in many ways. He has done a lot, and this event is huge in a lot of ways, and it's very understandable that I wonder if he ever did settle down and take responsibility in understanding that he did not keep with the covenant of not showing it more than 5 people. I mean, obviously in some ways he's going to blame himself, but I wonder how much he took responsibility for that, because Don Bradley keeps pointing out that he kind of was wanting to push blame away. Yes and no. I think he wanted to, he would be willing to accept blame for himself for the things that he did, or at least I would assume that he has. Like, yeah, sure I took it, and yeah, sure I took it home when I was refused twice, and I showed it to more people than I should have. I don't know how strongly he did that. Don Bradley makes it sound like he didn't do that much, because he was focusing on who stole it, because that would bother me so badly and forever. I can understand why it would be the focus of what his thoughts are around the whole thing, is because there's a point at which you go, yeah, I get it, just whatever. Yes, I know I did wrong, but what I really want to know is who actually took it, and who was really behind it all. And I think that's what would become of him in that way. So it's fascinating. I have a better understanding of Lucy Harris. Do I think she did it? I think Don Bradley has convinced me enough that I don't think she was actually a part of the theft or destruction. I do think that it really is a mystery. I don't think I will ever have any decent amount of way to say who took it and for what reason and why, other than just going, well, they took it for their own gain and didn't pan out. I wish I had more, but at least I have, I, first of all, I never really had a set opinion on what happened with it. I never thought of Lucy being the one who, took it and burned it. But I knew others had that. I know that was prominently featured in like a South Park episode, even. But at the same time, I guess it's just because, rumors get around and you hear about the rumors, even though you don't accept it. You're just kind of like, oh, okay, well, fine, whatever. At least it has dislodged me from being so certain or accepting of such a position. But anyways, love you lots. Hope you guys have a good day.